go ahead and start the recording.
I'm starting it right now.
Okay, everyone. So we're going to get started. So I, Antonio Martinez, want to welcome everyone to the governing board meeting, the special board meeting today. I'd like to call this special governing board meeting to order at 5:11 p.m. I'd like to ask that all members of the board to mute their devices at this time. Trustees of San Isidro School District Board and the public shall participate in this meeting via teleconference. The public may view this open session part of this meeting by accessing the YouTube link provided on the agenda. To listen to this meeting in Spanish, please call 321-351-6795 and enter the access code 828-507-684#. Para escuchar esta junta en español, por favor llame al 321-351-6795 e ingrese el código de acceso 828-507-684 signo de gato. Members of the public are welcome to record this meeting using their own personal devices. Prior to roll call, I would like to make clear for the record that this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that this governing board meeting is conducted pursuant to Governor Newsom's Executive Order N2920. We're going to move on to number 2, roll call. I would like to ask Dr. Potter, as our Superintendent Secretary, to conduct roll call for attendance.
Thank you, Mr. President. Agenda item number 2, roll call, beginning with board member Mrs. Irene Lopez.
Present.
Board member Mr. Humberto Gurmilan.
Here.
Board clerk Mrs. Rosalia Palasigue.
Present.
Board vice president Mr. Rudy Lopez.
Here.
And board president Mr. Antonio Martinez.
Present.
Mr. President, you have a quorum. All 5 board members are here.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. I'd like to now request that each board member respond to the following questions. We're going to start with board member Lopez, Irene Lopez. Mrs. Lopez, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
And were you able to hear our proceedings on this end until now?
Yes.
And do you have a copy of the agenda for this meeting?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Mrs. Lopez. Board member Gurmilan, can you hear me well?
Yes, sir.
And were you able to hear our proceedings on this end until now?
Yes,
And do you have a copy of the agenda for this meeting?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gurmilan. We're going to move on to board member Palasigue, board clerk Palasigue. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
And were you able to hear our proceedings on this end until now?
Yes.
And do you have a copy of the agenda for this meeting?
Yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Palasigue. Board vice president, Mr. Lopez, can you hear me well?
I can.
And were you able to hear our proceedings on this end until now?
I could.
And do you have a copy of the agenda for this meeting?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. We're going to move on to the flag salute. Please join me in the flag salute as we display a picture of the flag on our screen. I'd like to ask those in the meeting, including other board members, to please mute to avoid feedback during the salute. And we're going to get started. Right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're going to move on to the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I make the motion.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Lopez, a second by Mrs. Palasigue. Any corrections, additions to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Dr. Potter, can you do roll call, please, to vote?
Thank you, Mr. President. Calling for the roll call vote for agenda item number 4 to approve the agenda, beginning with board member Irene Lopez.
Yes.
Board member Humberto Gurmilan.
Aye.
Board clerk Rosalia Palasigue.
Yes.
Board vice president Rudy Lopez.
Aye.
And board president Antonio Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. President, the vote passes 5-0.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. We're going to move on to number 5, which is public comment communications on closed session items. Persons who want to comment on topics not included on the agenda or comment on agendized topics are invited to submit comments via email to the following email address on or before Wednesday, February 24th at 3 p.m. Please limit comments to 300 words or less. Public wanting to address the governing board telephonically may submit the public comment request form on or before Wednesday, February 24th at 3 p.m. All comments submitted will be read aloud during the meeting. Please note all email correspondence relating to this meeting will be part of the board minutes. If your comment is related to a specific action item, please identify the agenda item in the subject of your email. I will now ask our public relations coordinator, Mr. Francisco Mata, if there are any public comments for open and closed session items.
Good evening, Mr. President, Board, Superintendent, Cabinet, and guests. We do not have any public comment for closed session at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mata. So no comments on closed session. And on that note, I'd like us to recess into closed session. Do I have a motion to recess into closed session where we'll be discussing the following items? 6.1, Government Code Section 54957, Public Employee Discipline Dismissal, Release, and Reassignment. And 6.2, Government Code Section 54957.6, Conference with Labor Negotiators.
So move.
Second.
Okay. I hear Mr. Gomilan as a motion, and then Mrs. Palasiga as a second. And Dr. Potter, can you do roll call for us to recess into closed session?
Thank you, Mr. President. Calling for the roll call vote to recess to closed session, beginning with Board Member Irene Lopez,
Yes.
Board Member Humberto Gomilan,
Sorry, my
Mr.
button.
Gomina.
Yes.
thank you. Board Member Rosalia Palasigue,
Yes.
Board Member Rudy Lopez,
Aye.
and Board President Antonio Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. President, the vote passes 5-0.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. So we're going to recess into closed session at 5:18 p.m. and we'll see everybody there.
Can we start? Can we start?
We're just waiting for all the board members to join.
Looks like we're all in, except for maybe Antonio.
That is insurrection.
I'll check and see if there's a tech glitch. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, everyone. Our board president is having some major technology issues right now. And so he's going to try a different device to log on. There are two devices down right now. One won't hold a charge. The other one's not logging on.
So strange.
I believe the original device is very old. I see Mr. President logging on now. Hello,
Okay.
Mr. President. Sorry about the technology glitches. We'll solve this before the next meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. So let's reconvene from closed session at 6:17 p.m. Mr. Joey, Mr. Sanchez, can you report out for our closed session, please?
Yes, Trustee Martinez, in closed session, the board voted unanimously on a motion by Trustee Rudy Lopez and seconded by Trustee Palisige to give notice to 4 certificated administrative employees that he or she may be reassigned to an alternate administrative position and/or location for the 2021-2022 school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. I will now ask Dr. Potter to, as our secretary and superintendent, to conduct roll call.
Thank you, Mr. President. Calling for the roll call, beginning with Board Member Irene Lopez,
Present?
Board Member Humberto Grimilay,
Here.
Board Clerk Rosalia Palisige,
Present.
Board Vice President Rudy Lopez,
Here.
Board President Antonio Martinez. Board President, the sound cut out for a moment.
Okay, yes.
Mr. President,
Present.
all 5 board members are here.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. I would now like to request that each board member respond to the following questions. We're going to start with Board Member Irene Lopez. Mrs. Lopez, can you hear me well?
Yes, Mr. President?
And were you able to hear our proceedings on this end until now?
Yes.
And do you have a copy of the agenda for the meeting?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lopez. We're going to go to Mr. Gurmilan. Mr. Gurmilan, can you hear me well?
Yes, Mr. Martinez.
And were you able to hear our proceedings on this end until now?
Yes,
And do you have a copy of the agenda for the meeting?
I do. Thank you.
We're going to move on to Mrs. Pelasige. Mrs. Pelasige, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
And were you able to hear our proceedings on this end until now?
Yes.
And do you have a copy of the agenda for the meeting?
Yes.
We're going to move on to Mr. Lopez. Mr. Lopez, can you hear me well?
I can.
And were you able to hear our proceedings on this end until now?
I could.
And do you have a copy of the agenda for the meeting?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. And on that note, we're going to move on to public comment, communications on open session items. So persons who want to comment on the topics not discussed, not included on the agenda, or comment on agendized topics are invited to submit comments via email to the following email address: on or before Wednesday, February 24th at 3 p.m. Please limit comments to 300 words or less. Public wanting to address the governing board telephonically may submit the public comment request form on or before Wednesday, February 24th at 3 p.m. All comments submitted will be read aloud during the meeting. Please note all email correspondence related to the meeting will become part of the board minutes. If your comment is related to a specific agenda item, please identify the agenda item on the subject of your email. I'm going to now ask Mr. Mata to ask if there's any comments on open session items.
Good evening, Mr. President, Board Superintendent, Board, guests, and Cabinet. We do have 13 public comments, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Mata.
Yes. First one, David Alcas. Public comment, open comment, board agenda 8.3. I think it meant 9.3. I'm writing for two reasons. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude and say thank you to all the district leadership and school board for prioritizing safety. I especially appreciate the specific focus paid to the pandemic's impacts relating to the zip codes within San Isidro School District, where the COVID cases are particularly high. Every part of San Diego is affected the same, so I wanted to thank the board members who acknowledged those differences and the particular vulnerability of San Isidro by recognizing those zip code case numbers instead of only looking at the county as a whole. Secondly, I'd like to respectfully ask that you please consider not laying off any teachers. From my understanding, the budget will be okay at least in the next couple of school years, and our district will actually be receiving additional funds as a result of the pandemic that we would not have had otherwise. Some longtime teachers will likely retire at the end of the school year, which will ease financial costs. While there will be, quote, learning loss, unquote, going forward, and we need all the staff members we can get to help address that. This is even more true if we decide to have some kind of blended or distance learning options next year, where more staffing will be vital. Even if enrollment declines, I want to point out that smaller class sizes are beneficial for students, even if they're not always great for the budget. A 2014 meta-analysis of 112 peer-related studies found overwhelming evidence with 109 of 112 studies in agreement that smaller classes have a significant positive impact on increasing student achievement and narrowing the achievement gap. Thanks for your time and for working to protect our community. Sims teacher, David Alcas. Number 2, Lisa Bautista, Board Agenda Layoff Resolution. Good evening, board members. I'm writing to you to vote no on board agenda regarding layoffs. While I do appreciate that there are less layoffs than the past 2 years, I want you to reconsider. First, there is a need for more teachers due to, quote, learning loss, unquote, and the possibility to continue blended learning in the coming school year. Second, even though there is a decline in enrollment, Smaller classes allow for more academic engagement and social emotional learning. Lastly, teachers who receive these pink slips have been receiving them for the past 3 years. It's not necessary to put them through the stressful experience again, especially when most likely they will return. As someone who has received pink slips and returned the past 2 years, it's been stressful going through this time of the year. Every time I receive one, I'm left with extreme anxiety and fear, not knowing whether or not my job is secure, only to have it be secure months later. Having that fear hang over my head for months takes a toll on my mental health. My ability to teach students to my full capacity declines because I don't know if I will be there next year. Even my students the past 2 years have seen me change around this time and become worried I won't come back. Please vote no on the resolution for layoffs. I do enjoy teaching for this district, but I cannot take the stress of going through the layoff process again and again. Thank you, Liza Bautista, sixth grade teacher, OVH. Number 3, Shirley Kenny, agenda number 9.3. Dear members of the San Isidro Board, I urge you to vote no on the board agenda 9.3. The budget is okay for the next 2 years and we need more teachers for smaller classes. This would enable teachers to give students the individual attention needed to catch them up from the learning loss incurred by the adoption of distance learning. Also, I would hate to hear of any of my colleagues going through the stressful experience of getting pink slips, when most likely they will return. Sincerely, Shirley Kinney, teacher at Sunset School. Number 4, Maria Padilla, regarding 9.3. We are all going through hard times with this virus that has claimed many lives throughout the world. People are dying, getting extremely sick, losing their jobs, unable to pay their bills, closing their businesses, and now the district is thinking of handing out pink slips during these unprecedented times. We need teachers more than ever, especially with us knowing when we will be returning in person or us not knowing when we will be returning in person or continuing online. Regardless, we need to maintain lower class size. This is not the time to stress teachers out by handing out pink slips. Please reconsider. The board and district need to know that we are all working extremely hard and need your support. Handing out pink slips, especially during this time, is simply wrong and not giving out this year not with everything going on. Maria Padilla. Number 5, Todd Madsen, public comment, off agenda, February 24th board meeting. San Isidro School Board and parents, I am Todd Madison, the San Diego County Chair of the California School Choice Foundation. This year, parents are seeing our education system working to benefit its own interests over the interests of our kids. Parents' voices are ignored. Actions are taken based on what works best for district employees rather than our kids. The solution is school choice. Let parents choose the best possible education for their kids. The California School Choice Foundation is working to qualify an initiative that does just that for the 2022 ballot. The initiative would establish education savings accounts for each child. The tax dollars we pay for education would then be deposited into that account. This year, that would be about $12,650 per student. The ESA, Education Savings, acronym for Education Savings Accounts, would be used to pay for attendance at any accredited school, including San Isidro Public Schools, which means parents could still take advantage of all the benefits a large public school district provides. If a parent chooses less costly options, like homeschooling, the money that is left over at graduation would be available to use in college or vocational training. Parents win for their kids. They are allowed to choose schools that truly pay attention to what they want and, in the end, may have money left to help fund further education. Parents who are happy with their local schools, and in parentheses, and their sports, music, theater, or other programs, can certainly stay there. And parents who feel alternative options may serve their kids better can also do that. Parents get to choose for their kids. Parents can find out more and join the movement at californiaschoolchoice.org. Signing the petition there lets our government know they want to choose how their kids are educated. That's californiaschoolchoice.org. Thanks. Number 6, Missy Hendrick. Please vote no on board agenda item 9.3. Dear board members, I write to ask you to please vote no on agenda item 9.3, administering pink slips to teachers for the 2021-22 school year. While our enrollment numbers are low at the moment, much of that is due to parents being overwhelmed and disengaged with distance learning. Once we're able to return to in-person learning, our enrollment numbers will almost certainly increase. In the interim, if we administer pink slips to some of our teachers, they may find jobs in other districts, leaving us to scramble to find new teachers once the school year has already started. While we complete the often lengthy process of searching for and hiring new teachers, our students will be in overcrowded classrooms getting less than optimal instruction from a teacher who is overwhelmed with too many students and unable to provide each student the attention they need. Furthermore, if we are able to return to a school format that is more or less, quote, business as usual, unquote, in the fall, we will still need to adhere to increased safety and sanitation guidelines while doing so. Every report that I have seen has noted that more staff will be needed to carry out these measures. Why would you let go of staff at a time when we know we are likely to need more personnel? The worst possible outcome that results from having more teachers than our enrollment demands at the beginning of the 2021-22 school year is that the students are able to learn in smaller classes where they can get more support than they would usually be able to access during the time when they are most likely to need it, after having been out of the physical school environment for more than a year. Refraining from administering pink slips helps students by reducing class sizes and caseloads, as well as decreasing the likelihood that students will need to change teachers partway through the school year as large classes are split into smaller ones. Refraining from administering pink slips helps teachers and support staff by allowing them to administer very targeted intervention to students who are likely to need it at the beginning of the 2021-22 school year, and by reducing stress they experience when they are unsure if they will have a job in the fall. Refraining from administering pink slips helps site administrators by eliminating their need to deal with upset teachers who receive pink slips and figure out the logistics of splitting and shifting classrooms in the middle of the school year as more classes need to be opened. Refraining from administering pink slips helps the HR department by reducing their workload and both administering the pink slips and having to hire new teachers as enrollment climbs. Refraining from administering pink slip helps the district as teachers and support staff feel a sense of loyalty to a district which has shown loyalty to them. For all these reasons, I ask you to please vote no on board agenda item number 9.3. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Missy Hendrick. Number 7, Natalie La Rosa, letter to the board. Dear school board members, thank you again for what you've been doing to keep the San Isidro community safe. But I am writing tonight about a different topic. I am writing to ask you to seriously consider voting no on item 9.3. Quote, layoff of certificated staff, unquote. I wrote a similar letter to you all about a year ago, but it didn't really help. Fortunately, this year, less of these hardworking teachers received pink slips last year as well as the year before. I don't believe this layoff resolution is necessary. From the budget presentations I have seen, we don't need to make these cuts as it is presented. Some of the resolution makes sense. Not filling positions that have already been vacated. That's a good idea. Maybe you can change the resolution. I'm asking to keep people we have. We will need these teachers. There's no sense in putting them through this process again. I understand the process calls for a trial and everything. This costs money, time, and causes unnecessary stress. Class sizes do not have to be the maximum according to our contract. It's okay to have a kindergarten class with less than 24 students or a 6th grade class to have less than 28 or 32. In fact, it's actually better for the social emotional well-being of the students, and this will be extremely important in the year to come. We will need to provide extra support for students who might not have learned much this past year. As hard as we have been working, we all know that some students, for many reasons, were not able to access the full curriculum. Less teachers is not the answer. Furthermore, there most likely will be a necessity to have some type of blended learning or at least smaller class sizes with social distancing, at least at the beginning of the coming school year. We have learned how quickly things change and how difficult it is to know the future. It makes sense to keep these teachers. After a third year of receiving pink slips, they might not even want to stay. Let's not do this to them. I have worked with some of them over the past few years, and they are the kind of people who you want on your team. Please don't make this unnecessary move. Thank you. Sincerely, Natalie La Rosa, SYEA President. Number 8, Cisco, board meeting on 2/24/21. Hello, board members. It is unfortunate that you are thinking to cut some teachers and classified jobs. School districts in California are receiving and received large amounts of money, and you don't have any idea of how to spend all this money, and you make excuses that this money was spent already. San Diego Unified School District and Sweetwater School District have this problem, how to spend all this money. Don't forget, you are here to serve students and not yourself. Don't forget this. This is what you signed up for. Don't be selfish and make the right decision. Before you cut any of these positions, think about cutting any of your positions or school district management positions, since you are the people who make the most money. Think about think about it. Some of you make more money than teachers. We can pay 2 teachers' salaries, hire more tutors or teacher assistants. Thank you for your time, and I hope you make the right decision. Number 9, Sarina Hemakam, agenda item 9.3. Dear SYSD board members, I am writing to encourage a quote no vote on the board agenda number 9.3, layoff of certificated staff. Based on the current situation, it would be a positive to retain certificated staff. If we are truly to truly better support our students in the next academic year, retaining certificated staff in order to maintain class sizes at or below the current quote maximum would allow students to learn in a less restrictive environment, receive more individual assistance, and increase the social and emotional support that will be needed. Additionally, this will have the additional benefit of decreasing the chances of COVID-19 spread. The teachers who are most likely to be laid off are those who have received these notices for the past 3 years. All teachers have put in many hours to provide meaningful and effective lessons virtually and have been asked to demonstrate grace and understanding. As the district has sufficient budget to keep teachers on, it would be graceful to not put undue stress on staff by voting no to layoffs at the end of the 2020-2021 school year. Miss Sarina Hemakorn, 8th grade science teacher. Number 10, Karina Kai, no teacher layoffs. Superintendent Potter and members of the board. My name is Karina Kai, and I am a first grade teacher in our district. I am writing this letter as a student and community advocate to express my concerns regarding potential layoffs. For the 3rd year in a row, qualified teachers are deeply invested in the San Isidro community are on the brink of facing layoffs. This fraught and demoralizing process hurts not only us, but our families and our community as a whole, since teachers are the ones offering students normalcy during these trying times. As always, I urge you to think of what is best for our students, which in this case, it means to provide familiar faces, small class sizes, and extra academic support due to the learning loss caused by the pandemic. I ask you to vote no on the possible layoffs, especially taking into consideration that the budget allows it. I ask you to keep our SYSD community together during these difficult times. But most of all, I ask you to think of our students' educational needs, which are better served by the teachers that already know them, love them, and work so hard for their futures. Please Step up and be the leaders that San Isidro needs right now and show us that you care for our teachers, students, staff, and community by making the right choice. Vote no on teacher layoffs. Thank you for your time. Respectfully, Karina Kai. Number 11, John Richardson. Vote no on board agenda item 9.3. Dear board members, I urge you to vote no on personnel layoffs this year. As we all know, families are in a desperate need of support from the pillars of our community, and SYSD has an important role to play. The EDD reported the unemployment rate in San Diego County area rose 8% in December 2020, and in January, jobs decreased by 5,300 month over month. With many families suffering job loss due to COVID-19 closures and being reduced to only one income, losing a job could be detrimental to many of our hardworking employees' ability to provide basic needs for their families. A no vote sends a clear message to your community and constituents: you support and value us. During the previous board meeting, the budget was projected positively for the next 2 years. Yet the state and independent audits cited several operational and accountancy issues. With this revelation, there are clear opportunities to clean up the accounting and inventory practices and potentially uncover additional monies. Furthermore, the state and federal COVID relief funds, which have helped the budget remain positive, should be released into the community and not used as rainy day funds if that requirement is already met. It is a stimulus payment to be utilized during the current crisis, not future crisis. COVID is a crisis of a generation. Times of extraordinary hardship call for extraordinary leadership. Send a message that you value people over inventory and accounting pitfalls by voting no on item 9.3. Remember, your vote directly affects the ability of our families to provide and support the local economy. Vote no on 9.3 and be the pillar of the community by keeping our staff employed. Thank you. Sincerely, the Richardson family, Joan, Alana, and Alanis. Number 12, Sylvia Cervantes, board meeting. Please vote no on board agenda number 9.3. The teachers who will receive these pink slips have been receiving them for the past 3 years. It's not necessary to put them through this stressful experience again, especially when most likely they will return. Number 13, Marcia Omelina, board agenda number 9.3. I am writing this letter in support of my fellow colleagues. Please vote no on board agenda number 9.3. Please do not lay off or give pink slips to any certificated staff in preparation for staffing needs for the 2021-22 school year. Returning to post-COVID-19 classrooms will come with its own challenges, but together we can overcome anything. We have worked hard as an SYSD family, and we need to continue to do so. We must acknowledge all the loyal and knowledgeable teachers who have been the foundation for their students this year. The ones who will receive pink slips have worked just as hard as the rest of us, and they do not deserve it. Some of these teachers have faced this scenario for the past 2 years, and this will make it 3 years in a row. How is this treating, quote, family, unquote, fairly? If laid off again just to be hired back, they will have to give a total of 5 years of service and loyalty to our district before they are seen as a permanent employee. How will they ever reach permanent status if the district continues the layoff loop with them? They deserve permanent status because they are hard workers. In the difficult times and during a global pandemic, family sticks together. Please, let's stick together as a family and protect all employees from unnecessary layoffs and stress. Please make your decisions based upon people and not numbers and algorithms. Thank you, Ms. Marcia Omelina, Educational Specialist at Willow Elementary and Induction Support Provider. That is the end of the public comments, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mata. Okay, we're going to move on to 8.1, which is conference session, reports, presentations. And we have a presentation. 8.1 is student family
staff survey results regarding the instructional phases of reopening our schools. And Dr. Farkas is our Assistant Sup of Ed Services, Pupil Services, and Safety is going to be giving the presentation. So Dr. Farkas, you're up.
Thank you, President Martinez. Good evening, Governing Board, our Superintendent, Dr. Potter, Cabinet, and everyone out there listening, all the guests. Thank you for joining us tonight. What I'm going to be presenting tonight is a report on all of the surveys we sent out at the middle of last week. Towards the end of the last week, it was Thursday, we sent out surveys to our stakeholders, to our students, to our families, and to our employees. I'd like to thank Todd Lewis first and foremost for helping me crunch all the data and get it into the report from our survey. So I thank you very much, Todd. The purpose of the survey was to gather feedback, again, from all of these stakeholders to assist us in determining what direction we would like to go when it comes to the rest of the school year in our instructional programs. Actually, next slide would be good. Thank you. So our purpose then is based on not only receiving feedback from our stakeholders, but also keeping an eye on that metric, that key metric of 25 to 100,000 case count. So that permits underneath the 25 to 100,000 case rate, that permits our schools from K to 6th grade to open. When you have a case count, and we'll get to that in our next slide or in a future slide, when you have a case rate that's lower than 7 to 100,000, that's called the red tier, and that would permit the middle schools and high schools to open. And then finally, the specialized cohorts are also part of the purpose of this survey and presentation. Specialized cohorts already exist in our YMCA program, our distance support learning program supported by our YMCA staff. And a specialized cohort is a cohort we'll speak about again later in the presentation, up to 25% of our students. So next slide. So this slide reports the students' results from our survey. And one of the first lines under key findings says over 2,646 of our students responded to the survey. So I want to thank everyone out there that helped our students, all the way down to our pre-K students who actually took the survey. So I'm sure that was an incredible effort by families and teachers and staff to help our kiddos take the survey all the way up to our 8th grade, who actually had a very high percentage for grade levels. I think the 8th grade might have been the highest grade that took this survey when it came to percent. So I want to thank all the students out there for taking the surveys. Results from the surveys, one of the most key questions was, what would you recommend when it comes to coming back after spring break in April? Would you like to stay in blended, where you come to school 2 days a week, or would you like to stay in what we have right now, which is our distance learning model? And our responses from our students were 40% would like to come back for blended, and 59 to 60% chose distance learning. Another question that was asked during the student survey was, how are you doing in distance learning? How are you hanging in there with the new model? And 84% of our students said they're either doing great or doing okay. So that was a pretty nice number to see. 16% unfortunately said they're having a hard time in distance learning. And then a final question in the survey that was an indicator of what was going on with our distance learning program currently was, would you be okay staying in distance learning if we finished the school year in distance learning? And 14% said they wouldn't be okay with staying in distance learning, but 86% said yes, or maybe they would be okay if we had to stay in distance learning. So that was a nice, good collection of data for that finding. The graph at the bottom left just indicates the 40% versus the 59% when it came to the stat. Feedback for students. This was really interesting because I think Some of them didn't have much to say when it came to any extra additional comments, but I was really impressed with so many that were just able to, even if it was a sentence, some even went more than one sentence and really shared how they felt about when it comes to distance learning versus coming back for blended learning. Some of them said just simply, my teachers and the staff that work with me are awesome. So they're doing great and they're happy with their teaching online and the support they're getting. Some of them said, I want to go back to school. So there's some out there, if not a lot of them, that want to come back and get back to our traditional setting. And we all long for that day. So hopefully that day is coming. I want to keep my same teacher, and that's a big one to remember for future slides as we talk about our next steps. So they're excited about keeping their same teacher and finishing a school year just like they would in a traditional model. And a few expressed some anxiety about having to test for COVID, especially the nose test. They weren't excited about taking the swab in the nose in any way. And a few said they're not having as much fun online as they would be at school. They remember how it was at school and they're not having as much fun online. Missing friends is another big theme that was throughout the feedback. They're missing their friends, being able to have lunch and socialize and have recess and just be together like students, like we all want our students to be. And then finally, the last real aha was the some of them really said they're feeling comfortable with Google Classroom and they're enjoying it. So they're feeling like the Google Classroom might be something that could be beneficial even back when we get back to our traditional model. So they're enjoying their teachers working on Google Classroom with them. So as you can see, really a nice array of feedback from our students, and I'd like to just thank them again for taking the time. Sometimes if you're putting the comments in, it would take about 10 or 15 minutes. So I want to thank everybody for the time they've took with the student survey. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is our family survey. This one gave us a lot of information. The family survey, as you can see by the graph at the bottom, the pie chart, we had 1,903 respondents. So really impressive job by our families to share their input and share their voice. 36.5% said they would like to send their students, their children, back to blended learning if it was permissible. 63.5% said they'd rather just stay on distance learning to finish the school year. Zip code wise, when it comes to how we're going to address this, Mr. Lewis helped me in a huge way so we can delve a little deeper into our data. And then we broke it up by schools and zip codes. And we had 630 respondents from the schools and zip codes 92154. And again, remember that for our future slides coming up. 41% of the zip code 92154 parents and families said they'd like to come back for blended learning, 41%. That's 256 people. And then 59% said we'd rather just stay on distance learning to finish the school year. And then in comparison with our schools, more of our schools that are in the 92173 zip code, we had 1,265 respondents, really impressive. 34% said they'd like to come back for blended, have their students and children come back. 64 said let's stay on distance for the rest of the school year, and that's 813 of the respondents. And here was something that I noticed when I was looking at each school. Schools ranged from 20% all the way to 43%. So 23 percentage difference for blended when it came to opinions by school families. And then 57 to all the way to 80% that said I'd like my children to stay on distance. So there was a little bit of more of a range than expected when it came to schools. Feedback from families, this was really just, again, impressive. Everybody's looking from all the different lenses of this pandemic. So we really appreciate the feedback. Student transmission is rare. From student to student was a comment that was made a few times, and it usually comes from home. Students from a family must stay on the same schedule if we did move to blended, so that we'd have, obviously students that were at school at the same time and then at home at the same time. Students are keeping our kids safe and our staff safe, and just prepping for next year was a key comment. Just waiting until we come back next year and being ready and keeping everyone safe. Distance learning isn't going as well as they'd like it to be, so they would like to see the schools open. Children have health issues too, because we talk about the health issues of our adults in our country and in our school districts, but we also have to remember they said asthma was a key comment as well when it came to student health. And then masks are also difficult for the little ones to keep over their nose and mouth through a school day, even if it's a modified blended day. And then wait for vaccines for the teachers and the adults and the families that'll be sending their students to school. So that was the feedback from the families. Really another nice array, and just thank you very much to all the families out there for taking the time to take the survey. Next slide is our—
Dr. Farkas, I just want to applaud you for separating the surveys based on zip code, just because that right there is essentially a good number from both zip codes. And essentially it tells us actually, that it's essentially the amount of parents, it's kind of like equally distributed, because we have two schools in 92154, and then we have 5 schools in 92173. So that really shows, for the most part, a good number. So I just want to applaud you on your efforts to get the survey out to the families and to the students.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Yeah, I think the more we think and the more time we spent on this survey and the data, there were more ideas. I think we could have kept building more slides to go a little deeper from that, especially with Mr. Lewis's expertise. So thank you for mentioning that. It ended up being a fun way to disaggregate the data. So we did find some real ahas in here. So thank you. The next slide also brings us some real interesting information. This is our employee slide. And again, something to celebrate was the participation rate. I mean, everyone's voice was something we were interested in hearing, of course, and then also to really chime in. 447 participants. That is impressive. And then also we had 50% of those participants are classified group of employees, and then 47% were certificated, 3% management. And here's something, almost all of our teachers took the survey. This was impressive because they were working with their students, and they also took the survey themselves, which was obviously a little different questions, but not that different. So out of 236 teachers, we looked at the math, and it was 211 of them out of 236 took the survey. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your feelings and your feedback, everyone. 81% said, let's remain in distance learning with the possibility of keeping to keep moving forward on those cohort ideas that we'll be speaking about soon. 19% said launch the blended if it's allowable by the county. Feedback from our employees. Again, a focus on the zip codes. Everyone's really educated themselves on all this new information and this pandemic. Keeping an eye on our zip codes is more important than anything. So they did a great job of mentioning safety and our zip code tracking mechanisms. Preparing for reopening in the fall. That was a big push, saying let's focus on getting ready for next fall and doing it right, and not reopen until fall. But then at the same time, we had many that said students need to be in the classrooms, like we all talk about, getting them into the classroom so they can socialize. And there's nothing that beats instruction when it's face-to-face and teacher supported and instructional aid supported as well. Do not change the teachers because it'll affect routines. There'll be retraining for procedures, and there'll be time lost when it comes to all the safety and everything that goes with it. So that was something that was mentioned more than a few times in the feedback. Don't change our teachers. And then vaccinate first, making sure everyone has opportunities to get both dosages of vaccines. And then need the face-to-face interaction and the socialization, very similar to what the students were saying. It's really important to try to get that face-to-face interaction and socialization safely. So that was the employee feedback and slide from their data. And then we'll go to the next slide. This one is based on the guidelines. And when we talk about how we can reopen, we've heard the word purple tier plenty of times. So the purple tier is when our case rate is above 7 to 100,000. If you're a school that already reopened in any way prior to this time, there's a different way to reopen, and that is where you have to post your COVID safety plan. And we did that anyways. Even though we don't qualify, we still posted it. Everyone did a great job working together, and we posted our COVID safety plan. But right now, I highlighted not previously open, because technically, even though we have our YMCA program going, and we have our sites being supported by some wonderful classified staff workers, we don't have a qualification for being previously open. So we fall under that. And that's the COVID safety plan posted, which we've already done for our K through 6, basically for our whole district. And then we're submitting that as well to the state safety, the new dashboard. We submitted to that as well. And then it gets reviewed. Grades 7 through 12, I mentioned earlier, those can reopen, but they're not permitted if they're in purple. So you're not allowed to reopen your middle school or your high schools if you're in the purple tier, just the elementary. K through 6 can reopen as long as we're below the 25 to 100,000 case rate. And again, I keep saying, wait for that, that's coming as well. And then a special note is just the in-person instruction can be offered as, again, another word I keep saying, cohorts or specialized cohorts, and I'll present that a little bit soon. Red tier is the tier below purple tier, and it's a big difference because purple tier goes from 7 all the way up, all the way to that 25 and beyond, and we'll see that. Red tier is 7 and down. So if you're in the red tier, which there's a very good possibility when we enter March that as these case rates decline, fortunately, we may be in the red tier, crossing our fingers. The COVID safety plan was still posted before reopening for in-person. That's the blended model. And then schools may post their COVID safety plan during the purple tier, which we've already done as well. It's on our website. So that's just a little bit of an idea when it comes to case rates and purple and red tier. It gets a little confusing, but I think everyone's done a good job of communicating and working together on understanding that and talking about reopening. Let's go to the next slide, because we can always go back and talk a little bit more about that. Blended learning program. The blended learning program, I've mentioned a few times, and I think we've talked a few times along the way this year. The blended learning program is based on a student coming to school 2 days a week. So an example would be Monday and Wednesdays. For an instructional day within the blended learning model isn't going to be as long as your regular school day, but it still is a substantial amount of time on the campus based on the blended learning schedule. So you'd have Monday and Wednesday, and then another student would be like a group B, they would come to school on Tuesday and Thursday. The rest of the time, those other 3 days, they would be working at home online. So that's where the blended work comes in. This would give us the opportunity to serve approximately 40% of our students, and that's about as many students that would like to come back. And then also families also indicated about 36 to 40% said they would prefer coming back to in person. So we have the capability with our classrooms, and based on the blended learning model, should we move forward on blended to serve our students safely. And again, just incredible work. I'm really proud of our district for the teamwork and preparing all of our schools for whenever this day comes. I put us way up there as far as dealing with the infection rate of our zip codes. It's very high, and still being able to operate and keep things moving forward. Just an incredible job by everyone in San Ysidro. Considerations for the blended learning program. There's a couple pretty serious considerations. One is potential for our teacher changes. As we know, if some students are staying on distance learning and some students are coming to blended, it is an adjustment that we'd have to make. And HR department led by Linda Gonzalez has done a fantastic job of organizing how we could operate that. And also some students do, or some teachers due to health reasons are also interested in staying on the distance learning model. So it could work, but the key factor is it's going to change class rosters and disrupt a few things when it comes to organizing teacher assignments. Ending of March and early April, we have spring break, and then we would come back April 5th for just an example that was mentioned on the survey, to the end of June, which is June 10th, our last day of school. That's approximately 9 to 10 weeks of blended as an option. Weekly and bi-weekly testing, and I did mention a few students that were a little anxious about the swabbing of the nose. We do have to continue to move forward on some sort of testing for our students and staff, even if it's every other week. The good news is they are really rolling out a lot of the saliva testing. So I've seen it in action where it's just a simple saliva drop in the little plastic tube, and that's all it takes. So that's good for anyone that fears any kind of swab of the nose. Quarantine still is a factor out there. Hopefully it wouldn't be too much, especially if we were in the red tier. But every time there's a case that's a positive case in a classroom, that cohort has to quarantine, which means they would not be on campus. They would all be at home. So we'd have to do that shift pivot to working just online with their teacher. The positive would be they all know how to do it because they're doing a fantastic job now. So that would be a 14-day period, which would encompass probably at least 10 school days. Staff preference, we know that the staff has weighed in a significant number. Again, thank you for that. That really makes a difference. 80% still prefer to stay on distance learning for the rest of the school year, while 20% said it's possible that they'd be interested in coming back to a blended model. And then just the week of March 9th is kind of a target as when we get to a future slide here, the target date of possibly going into red tier, which would give us an opportunity to look at reopening during that window. All students and families who would like to stay in person would be served, but also anyone, again, that from the model from the very beginning of the school year, if we shifted to blended, we still would offer full distance learning programs, so no one would have to come to school if they weren't comfortable with that. Next slide. The next slide is that specialized cohorts we get to. I mentioned it more than a few times along the way, and now we're at the slide where we talk a little bit about the cohorts. It's pretty simple to understand once you understand that it's not really the blended model where you have half your students in a classroom, like 12 of them, but the specialized cohorts is more about just having one group that's with a teacher. It could be like it's like an additional opportunity, similar to what we have with our distance support learning program with our YMCA. They're still working online with their teachers through their distance model and their Chromebooks, but we have a YMCA staff member supporting them. That's one example of a cohort, and they stay together so that there's not mixing of students and staff. A specialized cohort also can be up to 25% of your student enrollment. So you could have a significant amount of students on your campus. It just can't be more than 25% at that day for that day. At-risk students are the reason why the specialized cohorts even was identified as a need in the summer. It was, if we're on distance learning, how do we still get some of those students with high needs, like our special education population, students with disabilities, and also homeless, poverty, and our English learners. As we know, we have all of those groups in our district. So how do we get a chance to identify them that are most in need and get them on campus safely with these very small cohorts? That's what the specialized cohort's all about. And then you talk about launching the first round of it. We did launch it in October when it comes to, again, the distance learning support programs at Smythe, Sunset, Sims, and Ocean View Hills School with our YMCA programs to support our families and our kids. And then that could just be an expansion into our other schools at 25% capacity. Considerations for specialized, just like we talked about with blended, considerations are making sure we have the staff to support any kind of specialized cohort. Negotiations are in process to kind of work on how we could bring somebody back to support students by voluntary basis. Friday is a target date that we've had success working with our teachers on. Potential stipend to support the instructional needs of our students and our staff. And then there's various models that could run concurrently together. So we have our YMCA at a certain capacity, but we also could investigate the opportunity to work a little bit more on expanding, like I said, to bring more small groups into certain areas of our schools with our teachers, including our middle schools. Next slide. I told you this was a long presentation, but we'll get there. We're almost there. COVID case rate data. So this one is a real, I never thought that we'd be celebrating data like this, but this is a real positive chart here, because as you can see, when we look on the left there, and we have January coming out of our winter break, the county was at 60.6 case rate. Our zip codes were sky high at 227 and 151 respectively for our two zip codes. And then as you can see, not only by that line graph below, with red representing our San Ysidro 92173 and green representing our 92154, blue way down there representing our county. But you can see just nice and easy with the numbers and how they reduce. They keep declining as we go over to February. We're still waiting on the update on the data for our zip codes coming in for this next period of time. But the county, we just saw some real positive indication that we now dropped to 15 at the county, which is still that purple tier, but much lower than 25, which is the required number for opening elementaries. And then pretty soon, if we can get to 7, then it's full red tier, and we could even open up middle schools as well. So that is some impressive case rate data. It looks like the county, not only getting those vaccines, but also wearing those masks and social distancing, it's making a difference coming out of the winter holidays. So positive stuff, everybody, congratulations, and let's keep it going because we can't celebrate yet. Next slide. Our next slide is about vaccines. And the good news is we've had right now, as we speak tonight, 39 of our San Ysidro school employees, San Ysidro School District employees, have been issued letters and have moved forward on vaccines. These are all our health-based employees. And I've gotten a few reports of getting double doses. So some of them are fully vaccinated, which is fantastic. Yeah, good stuff. And then Dr. Potter's done a fantastic job of getting us a partnership with the Sweetwater partnership with their district, because they had an opportunity coming up in the near future here to vaccinate at-risk employees that are considered in the Tier 1B. Those are people that care for elderly as health care, and also anyone that's 65 or older. So we are setting up appointments. We've got some slots thanks to Dr. Potter's relationships and networking. We've got the opportunity to bring in and serve more people, and we've been working on that all day today to connect with some of our staff that would qualify. So good news in the near future coming up with vaccines. The governor also announced very recently that 10% of the portion of vaccines distribution will now be set aside starting March 1st, which is coming up soon, for our educators. That won't be easy because we need to make sure that even if supplies finally here, we have to make sure that we're getting on those appointments. So we'll continue to look for opportunities similar to the Sweetwater opportunity and get some more support down in our San Ysidro area. And then March 15th, we just added this blurb here at the very bottom. That's where healthcare like Kaiser and other providers could start determining about getting some extra vaccines to our people that work in education and childcare settings. And then you can see a lot of that is us as far as educators and people that work in education. So that's exciting. We'll continue to share good news about vaccines, availability with vaccines, accuracy when it comes to what we're sharing, so people aren't thinking they can get it and they can't, because that's always a tricky one, because we want to keep moving forward. And I want to thank Mr. Mata for helping us get that information out as soon as we can get it out.
And
Next
Dr.
slide.
Farkas?
Yes, Dr. Potter.
Yeah, I'd like to share just a little bit more of the good news about vaccines.
Please do.
Thank you. So today, late this afternoon, our county supervisors held a press conference at about 2:30. And the chair of the county supervisors, Nathan Fletcher, announced the exceptionally good news that our county of San Diego will be opening up the next tier for vaccines accessibility beginning this Saturday. It was fantastic news. The next tier includes 3 sectors. The first sector is education and childcare. The second sector is emergency responders. And the third sector is agriculture. The appointments that are through the county health department for vaccines, they have limited appointments. So if you fall into one of those 3 sectors and you're eligible, you probably want to go as quickly as you can to make the first round of appointments that are available. They do think they'll run out of appointments just because of the sheer number of people that fall into those 3 categories. The other great news that Chair Fletcher announced was that while the governor is allocating or has asked all counties to set aside 10% of their vaccines just for K-12 educators or for the education sector, the county of San Diego is going to increase that set aside for K-12 educators to 20%. So in San Diego County, we're going to have a 20% set aside of vaccines for K-12 educators. It's fantastic news. Then, in addition, and who came up next was our County Office of Education Superintendent, Dr. Paul Gothold, and he announced that the County Office of Education and VIBA have partnered to provide vaccines to K-12 educators only. And this will be a closed appointment system for K-12 educators. So that means that you wouldn't have to go on the county health system for an appointment, but rather VIBA, which is our health insurance provider for most of the districts in the county of San Diego, would work directly with school districts to schedule appointments for employees within each of the school districts countywide. The priority for these K-12 educator appointments through VIBA for vaccines would first be to the communities hardest hit by the COVID. And so our community rises near to the top to be identified, to have access. School districts also would require a plan for reopening schools and an MOU to be eligible for the VIBA vaccines. And it would be prioritized to staff who are working in schools that are reopening or about to reopen. So exceptionally good news. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to our county superintendent, Dr. Gothold, to the chair of the county supervisors, Nathan Fletcher, and also an extremely warm and sincere thank you to County Supervisor Nora Vargas, who met privately with a couple of our South County school districts and has truly become an equity hero because she's been advocating for communities like ours, hardest hit by COVID, to be prioritized for vaccine access for educators. So just want to give you that news. It's fantastic news for our community of San Ysidro and our school district, and we're most grateful.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. And just as I said before this slide, or during this slide, things keep changing, and that's a perfect example. Great save, Dr. Potter, because this slide was finished up last night, and I think most of what Dr. Potter said was news from today. That's how fast things are changing, and we're very excited with the partnerships and the momentum. So thank you, Dr. Potter, for chiming in with all that great information about vaccines. We'll continue to update and share with our stakeholders all the good news that's coming in. Next slide. Oh, this next slide is pretty much the last slide before we get to the questions and discussion. The timeline. So we know the school year is ticking. We also know our case rates are declining, thank goodness. Now we are looking at possibly an opportunity for March 4th, the next upcoming board meeting, sooner than later, coming up with a decision on our best next step when it comes to finishing up whatever the start date would be, whether it's March or after spring break, to the finish line of June 10th. And then, of course, we'll reset for the opening of next school year, whatever the safety requirements set forth. So we're looking for next March 4th board meeting to move forward on our decision for our instructional models for the rest of this 2020-21 school year. The phase would be the phase 3 period would last again from any time after at the end of March, hopefully a red tier decision, and then all the way through June 10th, which is our last day of school. So that's the timeline we're looking at now. Ideally, we thought we were going to talk about this when we were in November. We also thought we'd talk about this coming out of the holiday winter break, but it just went a little bit the wrong direction. And obviously, our hearts are out there with everyone that's had to endure this pandemic. The next slide is just simply asking for any questions or guidance from our board.
Thank you, Dr. Farkas. Do we have any questions for Dr. Farkas? Comments, thoughts?
I'm glad that there are, thank you so much, Dr. Farkas and Linda and staff for putting this together. This was very, very intense, very heavy lift. And it's been a moving target. The target hasn't stopped moving. I think that some of these options were viable options, and we were kicked back into the purple tier, and then it was like back to the drawing board, and trying to remain cognizant of all of the needs, and my fear, of course, is not being able to meet every single need, every desire of every student and every family, and every educator, every staff member. But I think that this gets pretty darn close of hitting a lot of the nails on the head. I would just ask that we just keep our pulse on anything, any movement, any recalibrating of surveys, not recalibrating, I'm sorry, retaking of surveys, and then recalibrating these, numbers or results, and kind of tweaking these things. And I would just ask that that we put something very simplified, kind of like some of what we've seen just in our own review, but a very simplified slide on the district website that just shows the 4 blocks, of like kind of where we're at now, option 2, option 3, if there's a potential option 4, and just make sure to mark in there the which options have the teacher change and which options don't. Because I know that for parents and students, that's probably one of the most, if not the most important factor. So if we can just be really clear about communicating that, and then I think our just keeping our data on our district website for our zip code COVID rates, COVID numbers and stats. I think that would be helpful for the community, because I have been fielding some questions about that. And I don't check every day, unlike Dr. Potter, or 10 times a day, like Dr. Potter. I mean, I check frequently enough just to know if I'm leaving my house, but it's anyhow. I didn't have any questions. I think some of my questions were answered earlier offline. So.
Thank you. Thank you for the fantastic recommendations.
Thank you, Leah. Any other questions for Dr. Farkas?
I'll go, Mr. Martinez.
Okay.
That's okay. First, I just want to thank Dr. Farkas for the great presentation, everybody that worked on this. Obviously, like Trustee Palacio said, it's this big lift, a lot of information, a lot of work being done. I appreciate the work that was done also to put the survey out. I know that's a difficult task, but also want to thank everybody that responded to the survey. This is really important information that we need to make better decisions. Obviously, it's really hard to make the perfect choice with, like it has been said, a moving target. But I think this gives us a really good snapshot of where we are, where we're headed, and hopefully we can make the best decision moving forward and looking at the end of the school year, really, which is the challenge, considering how we've been trying to get ahead of the pandemic. It always seems like we're behind, right, the pandemic, but it's really difficult. I think everybody is at every level in the community and at every level in government. But I guess sentiment, what I get from the survey, what I get from the feedback that we're getting is the sentiment is that most, obviously there's a group of people that would like to go back, but I think we're seeing that most families, most students would like to stay in distance learning up to this point. And I would definitely support that. Obviously with the option of bringing in students that need the face-to-face interaction, that need the face-to-face support, and those most vulnerable students and groups. I think with this information, we can make a really good choice. We can make the best choice for our students, the best choice for the community. And I'm really hopeful and really excited also of how things are moving in terms of case rate. I'm really excited because I know that vaccines are going to be rolled out a little bit faster or better, more efficiently. There's going to be more. And I encourage everybody, like Dr. Farkas said, to keep working together, wearing your face masks and getting the vaccine. I'm eager to, go and get that. My mom just got the second dose today, so I'm excited for her. And I'm excited for other people that are already getting vaccinated. I'm excited for educators that are going to get it. So I think that's a big hurdle that we've been waiting to get over is vaccination, right? So hopefully, I think things are going to change in a couple of months drastically. I'm very optimistic. I guess maybe it's not a good thing because I've been optimistic throughout the whole pandemic and it really hasn't, materialized. But I honestly think we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So we should all be optimistic, but keep working really hard. I also appreciate all the work that everybody's doing, with the open houses and continuing to work through this because it's not over. We're seeing daylight, I think, and it's really it's positive news, but we're still not through it. So just continue to work together, continue to do what you're doing because I think we're near. But my question is, and sorry for the long comment, but my question is, Dr. Farkas or Dr. Potter, is there any talk or is there any shot? Do we have any possibilities of opening almost in a normal state by August or by the next school year? Is that something that's being tossed out there? Because I'm seeing a lot of information that a lot of things that might be back to almost normal, by July.
Yeah.
Yeah, boy, that's the $1 million question.
I know, sorry to put you guys in the spot.
It's the exact question that we've been grappling with as well. At this time, our state leaders, the governor and legislative leaders are still grappling with current year and how to reopen schools in the current year before summer closes, or at least providing guidance for it. They haven't reached the discussion point yet of what school will look like in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that nationwide, the goal has been to get vaccines to as many people as possible by end of July. And so that would mean that all of the tiers would be open for vaccine eligibility by end of July. And a lot of that will be predicated on supply and distribution models.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, it's just like the most difficult question I know, but I'm still hopeful. One last thing that I just needed to ask is, if we go back to blended before the end of the school year, have we factored in what happened with the cost of the testing? I know that's been an issue. Have we kind of crunched numbers and figured out if we can actually do it? Because I know that if we can't really provide the testing, then we might not be able to do it.
The testing fees are going down, and it's becoming almost like a little bit of a competition. So there's been opportunities for us to take our medium speed and keep working forward on what opportunities we have for our district, including what I said about the saliva testing, which would be fantastic to get that in place. So I think it was back in the presentation I did for the governor's plan back in January. One of the agencies was called Valencia, and their cost now has been shifted, and other costs are going down. We're trying to find the ideal cost to where we can just have it in place and be done where we can actually have testing even as much as every week through the right process. So we're still not at a decision point on what testing agency we're going to work with, but we are looking at some reduced costs. So I think it'll end up being affordable when we do make our decision.
The good news for us is 2 of our schools will have no cost for COVID testing because they're part of the UCSD COVID SASE pilot research pilot. So they have agreed to provide all students and staff at those 2 schools, which are Smythe and Sunset, with free COVID testing. So our goal would be to cover the other 5 schools with the COVID testing opportunities. And at this point in time, there are 3 different COVID test pilots that we're primarily looking at. One is the Valencia pilot. The other COVID testing pilot that's running in schools is happening through the State Department of Public Health and Coronado School District. Launched that. It's a rapid COVID test and launched that a couple weeks ago. So we've been watching that. And then also there's one in Cajon Valley School District with a local biotech firm. And that one also gives rapid results as well. So those are the 3 COVID testing modules or opportunities we've been looking most at. There are some criteria that we would, want to ensure are met with regards to COVID testing, but we're grateful at least to have the 2 schools covered by UCSD completely.
Thank you. Thank you for answering the questions, and thank you everybody for all the work that you're putting into this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Gumilan. Irene?
I feel that when I talk to parents or people that call me, when they did answer the question, I was happy that they did understand it and it was done a little more different this time. I wanted to thank Mr. Farkas and his team, anyone who helped him putting out that questionnaire. And I think it was very to the point and very clear. And I saw the results that you gave us on all that. And I think that a lot of the parents told me that, why want to change now to go back? It's going to hurt our children and us because we've learned to use the computer, have been able to really go in and sit with my child and guide him when he needs help with the teacher. And I've learned. And now you want to go back to having them go to school, and I'm not in agreement with that. And I asked them, why are you not in agreement? Because right now, the way it is, I don't have the vaccination, and there's no assurance that my 3 children will not get contaminated. And I'd rather stay at home, even though it's a sacrifice we make, but it's for the security of our kids. And I said, we're trying to do the best we can, but we have guidelines that tell us what we have to do before we can think about opening. And she said, why wait? Why do it now? It's only 9 weeks before we go back into a next school year. So why not wait and make sure that maybe we'll be better as far as vaccines and far as having people tested. And that'll be a lot more, I think she said that she thought it was a lot more safer for her. So I had several parents and I asked them, and I understand what you're feeling and I see what you're saying. So when I saw the results, I saw that most of them do want to stay on a distant learning because of that. And it's funny, but even what I saw in preschool, what they've done with these children, I am really, none of our staff was trained for distant learning, really. So they've used their own imagination, their skills, and found ways. And I saw these little kids in preschool, how much they advanced since I remember when my granddaughter was in preschool. They've brought in other programs that are helping to unite the child and the parent and they can sit after they finish their class with mom or dad. Even I saw a father involved, and I was really, wow. I didn't think maybe a dad, and he said yes, that he likes to see what his child is learning. And they see that they do want to, and they're ready for kindergarten. So I think there's a lot of things that we don't see because we're not really the parent or see those children that are growing and have learned something from this distant learning. And yes, I know there is a lot of children that are not, they're being missed in this, and they're not being able to cope with the actual learning on a distant learning. But those are the children that we can address on the cohort. And I think they need to be addressed, and we need to look into that also. But I'm really for, maybe I look at it and I think I don't want any employee or any child not to begin school without either being tested or given the vaccine. That's the most important thing. And I heard that what Dr. Potter said about Mr. Fletcher and Nora Vargas, because I talked to her personally, and I knew she was the one that pulled to get the satellite here at Southwestern, because I told her about our elderly people. I don't know why the clinic of San Isidro hasn't done it, but I said, there's people up here in these little homes, seniors, they don't leave their home. They can't walk, they can't drive. So how are we getting to them? I'd like to see something here that'll help them because it's nearby. So I want to thank them. I sent her a letter thanking her for all the work that she'd done because it was very important for our community. And like I told her, the city forgets about San Isidro. Tomorrow, mañana, they always tell us. But now I think that we have people there that are working hard to try to bring us the services we need. So I really think that we can do even more, and we're getting there. I see so many good things coming. So it's just taking our time, at the same time being very cautious and taking all this information and these programs that we've done to continue utilizing for our kids and for our community. So I thank everybody, Dr. Potter and Mr. Farkas, all your staff that are working so hard. And I know this presentation wasn't easy either. And I'm glad that you did separate the zip codes. I think that's real important because the county and all them, they don't think about our zip code. They think of putting us all together. But that's not always the real reason or really the real truth underneath. So I want to thank you because I know that wasn't easy for you, but thank you for making this presentation, which was great. And just say thank you to our board members that, we all working hard and trying to understand it. I know we make decisions that we sometimes don't like, but we make them because that's what we think that we're doing the best we can. So thank you all for everything in our community to understand that it's not easy. It's not easy, it's hard. And there's some things that we're doing, and I know there's a lot of complaints, but there's also regulations that we have to do because it's a law. And regarding notices, if we don't, then you have districts that people turn around and they want to sue the district. And that's, at this time, we don't need that. We need to try to do the best we can with the governors, with the state's laws, and complete it so we can be protected in that way. But at the same time, there's another thing that maybe we need to let the legislatures know. When I heard about, why do you do this every year? It's a law. But maybe that's what we need to now concentrate on, hitting those legislatures to change the law. Because I understand when they said it's a lot of stress. Yes, it's a thing that they go every year. Oh, we're getting it again. I don't know if I'm going to go back. And we lost a lot of good people years back. We did. But it's a law. I mean, we have to go by it. So I hope they understand it. And I know it's not easy. And I really pray that we can all really come back and work together and stay together and continue to work together. So I want to thank you. Thank everyone, because it's not easy.
Thank you, Mrs. Lopez. Mr. Lopez, you have any comments?
I have two quick comments. Thank you, Dr. Farkas, for your presentation. I just want to say it's good news about the vaccines. For those of you who are currently eligible and for those of you who are going to become eligible in the very near future, I just urge you to have patience navigating the appointment websites. It can be frustrating, especially for those who aren't particularly tech savvy. But yesterday, my father finally decided he wanted to get the vaccine. So he asked me to make him an appointment, and I spent a lot of time on technology, and navigating the county's different options for appointments wasn't very easy, even for myself. There just wasn't many options. And then I remembered the city runs a vaccination facility at Balboa Park. And I went on there, and he had 12 different options as far as times to go today. And the most difficult part was deciding what time he wanted to go, what coordinated well for lunch with him. So, I mean, there are sites out there that have openings. It's just being patient and finding them. And especially as it appears that hopefully South County will be prioritized in the next round. Just be patient. Secondly, as far as board guidance for moving ahead, I'm really looking forward to our next phase as far as reopening goes. And I say that on a personal note because for as much time as I spend sitting right next to my 8-year-old as he's on virtual learning is not for him. And if I'm given the option, I'm going to have him repeat the school year. And that's not a very easy decision to come to, but I just urge all of you to keep an open mind because virtual learning isn't for everybody. I understand, there's safety risks involved, but some people learn in different ways. So if some people decide they want to do blended learning and they want in-person instruction, you let them, and you want to do virtual, we'll let you. So just keep an open mind as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. So Dr. Farkas, I just have a couple of things to say, and I'll be brief. The first thing is, again, congratulations on the amount of input we got from the surveys. It's a good guidance. One of the things I noticed is that for every category, the majority of people want to stay in blended learning for the most part. So both, teachers, students, and then also obviously parents for the most part. And I also saw that also stood true in the zip codes as well. So both 92154 and 92173, majority wanted to also stay in blended learning.
You mean distance, Mr. Martinez? You meant distance.
Yeah, distance. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, that's distance. Okay. Yeah. And one of the things in terms of that, obviously, is that I also took note that from the comments of the students, which are fantastic, by the way. One of the comments I took note of is the students not changing their current teacher, which I know that when we move forward, whatever we decide to do, and obviously for me, safety comes first. I've always emphasized that if whatever we decide that the students that we need to prioritize ensuring that the students keep their current teacher. Obviously, the teachers would love that. The students would love that. And that's something that needs to be the priority, in my opinion. And that's something that the students emphasize in their comments. The second thing is obviously safety. I've always emphasized that just because San Diego County is in the red tier doesn't necessarily mean, and the stats show it, we just saw that those numbers, that the zip codes 92173 and 92154 are also in the red tier, which is not the case. So in my opinion, let's be mindful of that. I'm happy to see that they've dropped significantly. That is great news to see. But at the same time, they're still higher than the average for the county, which means, and what's going to happen is, my prediction is the county is eventually going to go to the red tier, but our zip codes are not going to go to the red tier. So, and that's one of the things I get frustrated with this whole average, because it doesn't, you can't take an average of a geographic area as big as a county and assume that everything is the same. And you can't make rules that apply to everybody when things are different. 92173 and 92154 have been the hardest hit zip codes with COVID. In fact, I believe in San Isidro alone, 1 out of 10 people have had COVID, which is outrageous numbers. So we have to be cognizant of that. And I think moving forward, let's keep that in mind as well. And I think the other point is that let's just, I think moving forward, I know we're going to have a meeting on March 4th, that let's try to see if we can get a solution that incorporates all the aspects that we have on the survey. So it's a win-win-win, a win for our staff, a win for our parents, and a win for our students. And that's something that I know, Dr. Farkas, you and Dr. Potter are going to figure out. I have a lot of faith in you, but I know that ultimately, if we can come up with something on that end of it, knowing obviously safety first, I know that we can, we'll finish off the school year on a positive note.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez, for looking out for the entire district, but also keep an eye on those zip codes. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, Dr. Farkas. And on that note, do we have any other comments from the board? Okay, hearing none. Dr. Farkas, you've done a great job. Thank you so much for the presentation. And we're going to move on in our agenda to general administration now, which is 9.1. The first one, 9.1, do I have a motion to approve the agreement with San Diego State Research Foundation for the National Center for Urban School Transformation Program?
So
I make
moved.
the motion.
Okay, I heard the motion from Mr. Lopez and a second by Mrs. Lopez. Do we have any discussion on this agenda item? Okay, hearing none. Dr. Potter, can you lead us in a roll call vote, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. Calling for the roll call vote for agenda item 9.1, Board Member Irene Lopez
Yes.
and Board Member Humberto Gurmilan,
Yes.
Board Clerk Rosalia Palasigue,
Yes.
Board Vice President Rudy Lopez,
Aye.
Board President Antonio Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. President, the vote passes 5-0.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. We're going to move on to 9.2. Do I have a motion to approve resolution 2021-0027, temporary certificated employee release?
So moved.
Okay, Mr. Lopez makes the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Mr. Gurmilan. Any discussion?
I have two questions for staff.
Yep.
So the first question is, under what board policy do we have to make these layoff resolutions at this time?
I'll defer to our legal counsel, Mr. Sanchez.
It's actually under the education code that provides that for temporary employees that they under the education code that they would be released prior to the end of the year. And traditionally, these are items that come at the same time in or around the March 15th deadline. But it is pursuant to the education code that provides for this.
So that's a state law and not the board's policy?
It's pursuant to state law. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, how do we determine who gets laid off or who receives a temporary layoff notice?
Because these are related to funding, that temporary employees based on a categorically funded program or some type of program that is not part of your general fund budget or the budgetary that is maybe a temporary funding source, that all temporary employees that fall into that category are released each year. So this is an item that is brought forward annually from all school districts. It's just something that because the funding are annual, that they have to be released at the end of the year. And then if the funding returns or is there, then they are rehired.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question. There's a lot of talks around school districts receiving large surpluses of money or large windfalls of money through, CARES Act and stimulus monies. Those funds, can or cannot be used toward teacher salaries and employment salaries and things like that, because I feel like there may be some, I mean, even in my mind, there's a little bit of misconception where the funding source has to be, where the funding source has to come from. You know, we can't just take all this CARES money and roll it into saving jobs, which we of course want to do. But so that's the first part of my question is, can CARES money be used for salaried employees?
I'll
CARES,
defer to our Chief Business Official, Marilyn Adriansen.
CARES Act funds and ESSER funds may be used towards salaries and benefits, but they are one time. So they are considered a grant, as Mr. Sanchez mentioned. So because they are restricted in one time, they are temporary positions.
So, you know, even if potentially, you know, it was there and we utilize it to save every single job this year or for the coming year, you know, it's potentially we could come into the same issue the following year, correct?
Correct.
And then, you know, the other part, oh, go ahead.
And Ms. Adriansen, would you clarify, the district's budget certification is not based on a single or 2 fiscal years, but rather a multi-year budget. Can you clarify that multi-year budget process? So if federal stimulus funds are able to safeguard the district's budget for 1 year, that doesn't mean that we would necessarily be successful to certify a positive budget certification over the required 3-year period of fiscal solvency. Can you clarify that?
That is correct. Because ESSER and CARES Act funds are one time, they fall off. So you use it 1 year and then the next year they fall off, but you still have the expenditures in place and without a funding source.
So what does that 3rd year budget look like on the multi-year with these funds?
The 3rd year out, we are deficit spending. It'll be the first year that we are deficit spending about $1 million. So the 3rd year out, we are still positive, but we are beginning to deficit spend. And when you do not resolve the deficit spending, it starts to accumulate and compound and build upon each other.
And that's what creates the structural budget deficit?
Correct.
So in essence, you're saying, you know, 1 year of $1 million deficit spending just becomes 2 million, becomes 3 million, becomes 4 with each passing year, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And
I mean, you know, I'm still also, you know, of not concern, but I still have my mind on, you know, our FCMAT audit findings over the last couple of years, and not just from the county, but from a state level, for us to implement measures that keep us fiscally stable for years to come, not just for this year.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what I'm trying to prevent is massive changes, you know, that could really, really, really hurt our community and our district. And that's kind of where my mind is going is Band-Aid now versus losing a limb down the road. I don't know if that's a really good analogy to use, but that's just from what I've seen on the budget. And while we're stable now, I feel like, you know, we're stable, but not, I don't think, from what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Adriansen, because I certainly am not a budget expert, but I don't know that it's stable enough to carry us through the next 3-4 years of deficit spending. I mean,
right. I think
don't
if
know.
we're able to chip away at it little by little, that's a good way to attempt to resolve the deficit spending. Just chip away a little bit at a time. That's all.
And we do have, you know, we have some promises coming out of the White House, but then that hasn't been realized yet. You know,
Correct.
so I feel like we have to work with what we have now. And okay, I think my questions are answered. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ms. Adriansen, along those same lines with the audit findings, while the district has successfully resolved past prior year audit findings, 21 of them out of 23, there are two remaining audit findings, and they have to do with cash flow. Can you explain those low cash flow audit findings and what that means? Because it's not about accounting, it's about cash flow. So explain cash flow.
Cash flow, right now we are borrowing about $12 million every year.
From where?
From our, it's known as a temporary transfer of funds. So the TTF, and it's borrowing from our future property tax. So we have to pay the TTF off. I believe it's the second week in April within the same fiscal year. So with the state implementing cash deferrals in this fiscal year, beginning in February, it's roughly 1.7 million for the remainder months of this fiscal year. So we are borrowing from our TTF, and then we will need to interfund borrow, which is borrowing cash from our other funds. So and then pay them back as well as the cash comes in.
I think it would be beneficial when we have our budget presentations, not just to do a state of our current budget, but to really dive into these maneuvers that happen, the moving of funding sources and borrowing of funding sources, because I know this, I know these things, but I still have to be reminded that, this is a kind of it's a maneuver that has to happen sometimes for us to make payroll, so, and Ms. Adriansen, you're very cool, calm, and collected when you do your budget presentations. I don't know how you do it, but I feel sometimes like I'm having heart palpitations just watching. So, but again, it's stable enough for right now. But, my goal is that our district would become stable, not just for now, but for the next year and the year after and the year after. So it might be good maybe to get more into those finite details when we do the presentations in open session.
Any more questions for Mrs. Adriansen or concerning the action item? Mr. Gurmilan, Mrs. Lopez, no? Okay. I just have a couple of thoughts on this. And I guess the main question is, so when it comes to certificated layoffs, there are two votes the board has to take. One is the preliminary vote, which is today, and then there's an additional vote later on. Am I correct, Dr. Potter?
Yes, the state law or education code requires for certificated a preliminary notification of layoff no later than March 15th and a final layoff notice no later than May 15th. And the purpose of those layoff periods and why the legislature created them is so that people would have the professional courtesy to know in advance if their job is going to be impacted, so they would have time to seek employment elsewhere if that layoff were to hold by the May 15th period. And so, yes, you're correct, Mr. President. There are two windows of time in the education code that would require resolutions by the board for preliminary and final layoff notices.
Okay. I guess my next point would be is that usually, and I've been on this board for a while now, but usually when it comes to layoffs, if people retire, that essentially eliminates the layoffs. Am I correct to say that as well, Dr. Potter?
That's beautifully said, Mr. President. That is correct. That At your next board meeting, the district has been working collectively with both of our bargaining units on an early tell notification MOU for retirement. And indeed, if we have employees throughout the district that provide notice of early tell and participate in that incentive, that by March 5th, give us notice by March 5th, depending on their job titles and whether those job titles match up to any of the preliminary layoff notices, those could help dramatically and those early tells would, in essence, if there are, for example, if there were to be two multiple subject teachers on the layoff notice, preliminary layoff notice, and we were to be notified by two other retirees that are also multiple subject teachers, then in essence, the layoffs become rescinded or not needed to be sent out.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Potter. That was a couple of clarifying questions from my end of it. And I have no additional questions. Does anybody else? Okay, hearing none. Dr. Potter, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. Calling for the roll call vote for agenda item 9.2. Board member Irene Lopez.
Yes.
Board member Humberto Gurmilan.
Aye.
Board clerk Rosalia Palasigue.
Yes.
Board vice president Rudy Lopez.
Aye.
And board president Antonio Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. President, the vote passes 5-0.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. We're going to move on to 9.3. Do I have a motion to approve resolution 2020-0026, layoff of certificated staff?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Lopez.
I'll second Mr. Martinez.
Okay, a second by Mr. Gurmilan. Do we have any discussion?
Yeah, same two questions. I assume the answer to the first one is, again, this is mandated by state law and not board policy.
It cool.
Yeah, the trustee Lopez, the education code 44949 and 44955 are what governs the certificated layoff process for certificated employees. And that is what creates the timelines with regards to having to make these, have the board adopt a resolution prior to the March 15th date, so that if any employees are affected by or may be affected by the layoffs, that they will have notice received on or before that date of March 15th. And then as board president Martinez had indicated, that there is another resolution that will take place if, in fact, any employees will need to be laid off, and that occurs on or before May 15th. And the time difference there is to also, I know Dr. Potter mentioned with regards to giving people notice ahead of time, there's also a time difference because it gives everyone almost a due process procedure in which they have the right to a hearing to determine whether or not they feel like in the seniority that they were appropriately the ones who would be receiving a layoff notice. And again, the layoff notices will only be sent out prior to March 15th if, in fact, after looking at the numbers, there will in fact be a surplus of teachers based on the layoff. If there are enough retirements, those layoff notices won't go off.
And the second question was how is it determined on who gets a notice?
It's that is also by ed code in these two ed code sections. It's very strict and specific, and it's laid out by seniority, and so it is a seniority process, so that the least senior individual in that particular classification or that particular subject is the one that gets laid off first. There's also tie-breaking criteria, which is also listed in the resolution, so that if someone is hired, if multiple individuals were hired on the same day, there is a tie-breaking that has been bargained with the association, and that's part of the agreement. And so that's how any tiebreakers would be decided.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Mr. Sanchez?
Mr. Sanchez, so that process that you just explained, that would kind of answer why for several years in a row, a member of personnel might get noticed every year because they may be less senior than another employee, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the individuals that are the most recently hired individuals are at the kind of at the beginning of the seniority list, so to speak, and those are the first individuals by ed code, and that are actually would be slated to get a layoff notice if in fact they were necessary to go out. And so oftentimes, unfortunately, it happens that some individuals will get a layoff notice every time that there's a layoff, if in fact there are several years in a row with layoffs, and that is just a function of the way that the ed code process is.
I see. Because I did hear that a lot. It's an unfortunate stressor, that happens every year to, as you said, the ones that are at the beginning of their time with the district, and it's unfortunate that that's the way that the ed code is designed, the way notices are given with regard to seniority, but thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Sanchez?
I have no questions for Mr. Sanchez, but if I may ask a question of our Executive Director of Human Resources, Linda Gonzalez.
Yes, Dr. Potter.
Ms. Gonzalez, how many total SYEA positions are there in our district?
We currently have 236 SYEA unit members.
And on this particular layoff resolution, how many SYEA positions are on this layoff resolution?
There are 6 positions on this resolution.
And of those 6 positions, how many are vacant positions that would impact nobody?
3 positions are currently vacant.
Where do you know that?
Thank you very much.
Can we have the same numbers for CSEA, please, once more?
We're doing, this is SYA.
Oh, we already did. Sorry, I apologize. I'll get them offline.
Any other questions for Dr. Potter? Okay, hearing none. Dr. Potter, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Calling for the roll call vote for agenda item 9.3, beginning with board member Irene Lopez,
Yes.
board member Humberto Gramilan,
Aye.
board clerk Rosalia Palasigue,
Yes.
board vice president Rudy Lopez,
Aye.
and board president Antonio Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. President, the vote passes 5-0.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. And on that note, I know that we would normally go to adjournment, but now we're going to be going to a recess into closed session again. And that's, so I'd like to get a motion for us to recess into closed session at 8:06 p.m.
I make the motion.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Lopez, second by Mrs. Palasigue. Dr. Potter, can you do roll call, please? A roll call vote, please.
Calling for the roll call vote to recess to closed session, board member Irene Lopez,
Yes.
board member Humberto Gramilan,
Aye.
board clerk Rosalia Palasigue,
Yes.
board vice president Rudy Lopez,
Aye.
board president Antonio Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. President, the vote passes 5-0.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. So we're going to recess and back into closed session at 8:07 p.m. See you all there.
Okay, Dr. Potter, I think we're all here.
We are, Mr. President. Thank you.
I want to just add that there's nothing to report out. The board did not take action in our closed session. I'd like us to reconvene into open session at 8:36 p.m. And Dr. Potter, can you lead us in roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Beginning with Board Member Irene Lopez,
Yes.
Board Member Humberto Grimilon,
Aye.
Board Clerk Rosalia Palisigue,
Yes.
Board Vice President Rudy Lopez,
Here.
and Board President Antonio Martinez.
Present.
Mr. President, all 5 board members are here.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. We do have a quorum. And on that note, I'd like to get a motion, have a motion to adjourn.
I make the motion.
I'll second.
Okay. I heard Mrs. Lopez and then a second by Mr. Gurmilan. Dr. Potter, can you lead us in a roll call vote to adjourn at 8:37 p.m.?
Thank you, Mr. President. Calling for the roll call vote for adjournment, beginning with Board Member Irene Lopez,
Yes.
Board Member Humberto Grimilon,
Yes.
Board Clerk Rosalia Palisigue,
Yes.
Board Vice President Rudy Lopez,
Aye.
and Board President Antonio Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. President, the vote is 5-0.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. So we are now adjourned. I just want to give a special thank you to Mr. Bruciaga. I had some technical difficulties today, and he saved my life today. So just thank you to him. A very special thank you to Mr. Bruciaga. And everyone, have a good night. Thank you for the meeting.
Everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Mr. Bursaga, distinguished champion. Next.
He's a
Yes.
champion.